All right, everybody, good morning. Welcome to a virtual visit to Fort Tryon Park with Leslie Day. And we are joined today by Leslie Day, who is a friend and naturalist and a member of the Senior Center at the YMHA and YWHA of Washington Heights and Inwood, where I, Ann Votaw, am the Director of Health and Wellness. And this is the fourth in our series. We would like to virtually do a round of applause for Leslie Day. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming, spending the time with me. Can you hear me, Ann?
Yes.
Okay, everybody can hear me. Good. Do you want me to get started?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to show my book first?
Oh, I do. I want to show your book up. I have a couple of books. We've got the Street Trees. Let's see if I can do that virtually. Street Trees. Okay. And then we've also got, this is my new book that I got, which is about birds by Leslie.
And all of those illustrations are by Trudy Smoke, who is joining us today. Okay, let me share my screen. And let me go to, oh boy, slideshow. Why can't I do this? Hang on. Come on. Slideshow. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting, maybe if I did this. I think I need a break here to just to figure out how to scoot it over so I can.
Sure, no problem. No problem, Leslie.
Slideshow, all right.
All right, I can show some illustrations by Trudy.
Play from current slide. Got it.
Oh, there we go.
So let me get rid of this. Okay, so this is a view of the Heather Garden where Aliza's screen is right now. The first 2 weeks, we walked through the lower park. We started in through the Bennett Avenue gate. We walked along here and out to Ann Loftus, looking at all the birds and the trees and then back. And then last week, we did the Heather Garden, the Stan Michaels Promenade, the Billings Lawn, the Pine Lawn, and the Billings Arcade. Today, we're going to the Linden Terrace and the Cafe Lawn, Sir William's Dog Run, and the gazebo. We're walking along here, around the cut to the Cloisters Lawn, the Cloisters, and ending up at the Alpine Garden. So on October 13th, 1935, the park officially opened. And this was a parade into the park. Thousands of people showed up that day. And the parade was led by the people who helped create the park. So here we have John D. Rockefeller Jr., and who used his own money, almost $4 million back in the 30s, to create this park and then hand it over to the city of New York for the New Yorkers. To his right is Hugh Johnson, who was part of FDR's Brain Trust. He helped create the New Deal. At this point, he was head of the WPA, the Works Progress Authority, that put millions of people to work during the Great Depression. To Rockefeller's left is Fiorello LaGuardia, New York's most famous and most beloved mayor. And here is Michael Blumenthal, who was the president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which manages the Cloisters. At that point, in 1935, the Cloisters hadn't been built yet, but it was being built at this moment. And back here is Robert Moses holding those papers. He was the Parks Commissioner then. He was the liaison between the mayor and the Roosevelt administration. And so they're all walking, it looks to me, like on Linden Terrace. So these are the little linden trees that have been planted a few years before. So we're going to start at the Linden Terrace. This is a pretty recent picture. As you can see, the trees have grown up. There's a plaque here, and I'm going to read it to you. This historic area and its surroundings were developed and presented to the people of the city of New York in 1935 by John D. Rockefeller Jr. The adjacent hilltop and outpost of Fort Washington was gallantly defended in November 1776 by the Maryland and Virginia Regiment. After its capture, it was named Fort Tryon in honor of the last English civil governor of New York. So William Tryon was apparently a very brutal guy who didn't take good care of his American prisoners of war. And it really kind of sticks in the gullet that they named this park after him. And I think the city has tried to change the name a few times, but it's stuck. So we are Fort Tryon Park. You can see why the outpost was up on that hill. It's one of the highest points in Manhattan, with back then in the 1770s, unobstructed views east and west and north. Here we're looking over the Cloisters, the Hudson River, the Palisades, and up here you can actually see the Tappan Zee Bridge, now named the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And so you can see all the way up to the lower Hudson Valley. And of course you can see south, there's the George Washington Bridge, and southeast through the Heather Garden. So this was the Linden Terrace in October 1935 when the park opened. Look how little the trees are. This is the same view today. There are 20 to 30 enormous linden trees, and almost all of them, there are many different species of lindens, but these are predominantly little leaf linden, which is a European species. It's called Tilia cordata. Tilia in Latin means linden, cordata, heart-shaped, and you can see the little heart-shaped leaves. They are producing flowers right now that will be opening in a few days. And they produce the most heavenly smell throughout the city because we have thousands of linden trees throughout the 5 boroughs. If you look closely at these lindens, you can start to see the ovary here is developing into a drupe or a seed. And this one you can see it also. They have an incredibly gorgeous fragrance because they are filled with an essential oil, a volatile oil that is an adaptation to attract pollinators. So honeybees and other pollinators find flowers because of smell. So here's a little honeybee, her pollen baskets filled with pollen. And while these are blooming, the honeybees will only go to these flowers. So they don't bloom that long, and they love the nectar and the pollen. And so beekeepers know when there's a nectar flow in the linden trees, and they know when to take the honey to have linden honey. They also attract butterflies like these painted lady butterflies and these beautiful little flower flies that have an adaptation to make them look like bees, like they would have a stinger. So this is defense mechanism, but they're flies, not bees. They only have 1 pair of wings, not 2. And they are flower flies or hoverflies are very important flower pollinators. At this point, the ovaries have been fertilized, the seeds are developing, there's a single seed in each of these drupes, and they're getting ready to fall off. This is Trudy's drawing of a linden leaf and flower, and each flower cyme is attached to this bract, a modified leaf that will help it sail down to the ground, and the seeds will then germinate and create a new linden tree. And by the way, that's an easy way to tell whether a tree is a linden if you see these bracts. It's a dead giveaway. So this linden tree died, I guess it was cut down, and these fungi are decomposing it. So mushrooms will secrete enzymes into wood, which will decompose the wood so that the mushrooms can absorb the nutrients. Fungi cannot feed themselves. They're saprophytic. And so they have devised a means of surviving by decomposing dead organisms, breaking them down into essential nutrients. And whatever they don't absorb goes into the soil for the other plants. The eastern part of Linden Terrace is the Flagpole Terrace. You can actually see the flagpole from the George Washington Bridge. Just like every other structure in Fort Tryon Park, it was designed by the Olmsted brothers, the sons of Frederick Law Olmsted. This is their model shop, which was part of their home in Brookline, Massachusetts. And this is their head sculptor, Selmar Larssons, a Norwegian artist. And here he's looking at the base of the flagpole. It's a model that he designed. And this is it today. But in 2012, when Hurricane Sandy roared through our park, it knocked down this flagpole. And I don't know, 6 months later, the park got the money to put a new flagpole in, and here it stands today. Of course, the flag is half-mast because of the 100,000 people who have died in our country, the tens of thousands of people who have died in New York State, most of them in our city. This is the Linden Terrace while the park was being built. And you can look through there. Of course, now there's all these trees. You don't have this kind of a view. But here you can see the Hudson River, the Palisades. This is similar view today. And when I was walking through, was it yesterday or the day before? Maybe it was, I can't remember the day. It's all melded together now. I looked up at the rock wall and I saw these beautiful little plants, Corydalus alba. They are growing in the heather garden. And it turns out they're from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, and they grow naturally in rock walls. And they were a part of every medieval apothecary garden. They were grown medicinally to use to help tranquilize people and help them keep calm. I thought I should take a few myself. So here they are growing in the wall, and they only grow in the wall where there's shade. And you can see when the seeds pop open, they must lodge inside the crack between these stones and grow a root into the crack, and the rest of the roots hang down. And here they are, just so lovely. This is a close-up of the flower. You can see the petals form these little spurs. And Corydalus in Latin means crested lark. And this is a lark from Spain. So the flower looks like the spur and the beak. This is a view looking up the steps to the Linden Terrace, covered in ivy. And I was looking online, this caught my eye. This is the same view. And I realized so many artists come to the park to draw it and paint it because it is so beautiful. This looks to me like the path coming down from the Cloisters on the eastern slope. And this looks like one of the paths up to the Alpine Garden. This is looking south through the Linden Terrace arch. And this painting was done by a friend of mine, Priscilla Hancock, of one of the gardens of the Cloisters. I think it's the Bonifant Garden. It's hanging in my apartment, lucky me. This was painted in 1940 of the Linden Terrace arch, looking north at the Cloisters. Now, if we look north today, we would see this beautiful little tree, a red buckeye. And when you look closely at the flowers, you see they're tubular, and at the leaves, which are fan compound. So each one of these is a leaflet. This whole thing is the leaf. But guess who loves these flowers? The ruby-throated hummingbird, our only hummingbird east of the Mississippi River. This is the little male. So if you get up there right now, you can see this little tree in bloom. To the east of Linden Terrace is the Sir William Dog Run, named for William Tryon. It's the largest dog run in Manhattan. It's an acre, a full acre. It has a run for small dogs and a run for big dogs. So this is looking southwest at that sculpture And the New Leaf Cafe is up here. And this is looking northwest. You can see how large it is. Love this picture. This is the octagonal house that's just outside of the dog run. And every Halloween, the dog owners have a big Halloween called Halloween costume contest. This is a neighbor of mine with her two dogs. And they have a parade and they have a contest, and all the local stores give prizes for the best costume or the funniest costume or the most outrageous costume. This is another neighbor of mine, Kip, who organizes it. So here's the little New Leaf Cafe, which is now closed. Not only would it be closed because of the pandemic, I think I said this before, but they need to find a new operator, and they are looking for one right now. And I miss it so much. I miss going out. I miss going to the movies. I miss going out to dinner. But I particularly miss this beautiful restaurant. It's such a place of beauty and comfort and delicious food. So hopefully it will reopen as soon as this is over and they find someone to run it. But just south of the restaurant is I can't forget, the Korean spice bush is blooming now. Heavenly scent. They're very large shrubs, and they're flowering all along the Margaret Corbin Drive now, just east of the cafe lawn. So here's the cafe lawn. This shot is taken from the Fort Tryon Park Trust website. And we're going to look, there's so many specimen trees on this lawn. This is an enormous willow oak. It's an oak tree, but the leaves look like willow leaves. And here are 3 trees I'm going to talk about. The first one is the weeping beech. They have it fenced off because it is a delicate tree. In fact, the sign says, help us protect this sensitive tree. But the branches are pendulous, so they don't go out and up, they go down. And if you were to go inside there, it would be like a little fort. You would have branches all around you to the ground. And not only does this tree grow up, but it also is like a walking tree. It creates new trunks. So the branches touch the ground, form new roots, and send up new shoots or trunks. They might grow as high as 40 feet, but they can grow 60, 80, 100 feet long. There's also a beautiful red horse chestnut that's blooming now. These pictures were taken just a few days ago. And there is a bald cypress tree. Remember last week we talked about the dawn redwood as being a deciduous conifer. Well, the bald cypress is also a deciduous conifer. That means it has needle leaves, and it's cone bearing, it's a conifer, but it loses its needle leaves in autumn. It mainly grows in the swamps of the south. And the wood does not rot. No matter how much water it's in, it doesn't rot. And if you look at all the water tanks on top of the buildings in Harlem and the Upper West Side and further downtown, you will see water tanks. And they're all made of bald cypress wood because it doesn't rot. Because the base of the trunks are in water, the roots are in water and they need oxygen. So the bald cypress sends up these little snorkels, these little wooden knees that are able to absorb oxygen for the tree. Next, here's the bald cypress. Next to the bald cypress is a huge linden. So here you can see those bracts and you can see the flowers forming. But when I look closely, I saw these little galls, and they are made by linden mites that only lay their eggs on linden leaves. And they're tiny little mites, little tiny flies. And the babies are less than 1/4 millimeter long. They're so small. And when they start to chew the leaves, they release a chemical that turns the leaf cells red, and the leaf builds up cells around the mite to protect itself, forming these little galls. And the babies stay in there all summer long, chewing away. And then in the late autumn, they fly out and they overwinter inside the bark of the tree. There is also an enormous copper beech on the south end of the cafe lawn. The copper beech is one of the largest of the European beeches, just exquisite. The leaves are red the entire time. And as we talked about in the past, the beech trees have very slow growing bark. As the tree grows in girth, the bark doesn't peel off, it just stretches. And so it's thin. And it's one of the few trees you can write your initials in, which people have done here. There's also a beautiful magnolia that's still flowering. And at this point, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about flowers and how they came to be. The first plants on Earth that developed seeds are called gymnosperms, and they are the conifers. They bear cones, and cones have male cones that produce the pollen and female cones that produce the seeds. And when the seeds are mature, they're on the outside of the scales of the cone, they fall off and new trees grow. They developed between 300 and 400 million years ago. Well, about 140 million years ago, the first flowers developed, and among them were the magnolias. You can see that the magnolia ovary looks like a cone. And when the magnolias developed, there were very few pollinators. There were just beetles and flies. There were no bees, there were no hummingbirds, there were no bats, there were no wasps. The insect family the class of insects was very small. And flowering plants and pollinating animals co-evolved. And so the more flowering plants diversified, the more pollinating animals diversified. So we started getting birds and bees and butterflies and bats. They co-evolved. Their evolution is intertwined. You couldn't have one without the other. When magnolia flowers evolved, there were no bees or butterflies. There were beetles, and they still are pollinated by beetles. This is a green June bug. At first I thought it was a Japanese beetle, but it's not. Much bigger than the Japanese beetle and actually very beautiful, luminescent. So here is a magnolia flower on that tree today. And here's one where the petals are dying and you can see the ovary forming, and that's where the seeds will come from. There are a few birds that like these seeds, like the pileated woodpecker. We have them in Westchester County. I've never seen them here. We have them in Jersey. They're our biggest woodpecker. But this smaller woodpecker, although still a big one, the red-bellied woodpecker also eats the seeds of the magnolia, as do squirrels. The cafe lawn is the site of the Battle of Fort Washington, a reenactment of that battle that the Americans lost in 1776. And it's held around the exact date of the battle, November 16th. So whatever weekend day is closest. Now that battle, this map is from 1777. And here you can see Fort Washington, which is the site of Bennett Park today, the highest point of Manhattan Island. Although when they built the Linden Terrace, they increased the height a few feet. So now it's a bit higher. But you can see why. I mean, they could look west. This is the Pearl. This is the ship, an English ship that was bombarding the fort. From the east, you had the English and the Hessians crossing the Harlem Creek to fight the Americans, and they came down from the north and they came up from the south. Apparently there's something like 700 American fighters and 3,000 British and Hessian troops. So of course they lost. And Washington and his troops fled from the Jumel mansion across to Jersey. So last week we took a tour under the Billings Arcade, and today I want to focus a little bit on the Billings Terrace, where there are a couple of wonderful trees called Camperdown elms. I mean, we've looked at the American elm and the Siberian elm. This is the Camperdown elm, and it's like the Weeping Beech in that the branches are pendulous, they hang down. And there's two of them. There's one at the south end and one at the north end of the overlook. Here's the beautiful trunk. And remember, we were looking at the elm seeds, the elm samaras. The seeds are in there and the wings are around it. Samara means wing in Latin. Between the two Camperdown elms is the stand of blooming lilac. So it smells quite beautiful in there. And this is the overlook, looking south at the George Washington Bridge and Fort Lee. And this is where Washington fled from Fort Washington to Fort Lee. This is the path that goes, so this is from 1914. This was Billings' pergola and the Tryon Hall. But those rocks, so he created this driveway. So he had a blast through those rocks. Here's the picture. Actually, behind me is Elise's photograph of these same rocks. Maybe this is Elise's photograph. I have to ask her. But here you can see these yucca plants growing at a very thin soil on their own. Nobody planted them there. And this is Manhattan schist, the bedrock of Manhattan Island. And as we walk north toward the Cloisters, you can see all the drilled holes where they put dynamite to blast to create this path to walk toward the Cloisters. Growing on the rocks is an organism called lichen, and it is composed of two organisms. On the top is algae, and on the bottom is a fungus, and they rely upon each other. And they are beautiful. Lichen comes in all different colors, but it only grows on tree trunks and rocks when the air is clear. So if you have polluted air, you don't see lichen. Walking along, I noticed on that path toward the Cloisters, all of these sycamore maple trees. And I think last week or the week before, I showed you that they were flowering. Well, I notice now the flowers are producing the maple seeds. And you look at this little ant. I'm going to turn off my microphone in a minute because I have a little video coming up. I want to show you. First, I want to show you the seeds. So here, this was a single flower. This is the base of the flower. This is the stigma, the top of the flower, and the ovary is expanded to form twin samaras. So there's two seeds here. This is where I'm going to turn my microphone off. Maybe I'll leave it on. So look at his little antennae moving along, finding nectar. I just love that. So I didn't see him when I pulled the flower off. And then when I saw him, of course, I left the flower on the wall so he'd keep eating. And as I walked along, I noticed another huge oak. And this is willow oak, like the one in the lawn, but this one is flowering now. Here's Trudy's drawing. Now, all the members of the red oak family have bristle tips on their leaves. So this is the willow oak. This is the red oak leaves. Wherever there's a vein, it ends in a bristle. All of the red oaks have bristle tips. This is the pin oak, also has bristle tips. But members of the white oak family, like this eastern white oak, have rounded lobes with no bristles. The next oak tree I saw was a chestnut oak, which is in the white oak family. It has no bristles. It has rounded lobes. And then I noticed a pignut hickory. This whole thing is one leaf, and these are leaflets. This is feather-shaped or pinnate leaf. and it produces these nuts in the fall. And they split open into 4 pieces, the outer husk, and then inside there are the little seeds that the squirrels and birds love. So I was walking along here, and this is the cutout that they made so that you can drive out of the park or drive into the park. These are the men. They had to drill through tons of Manhattan schist to make this opening. And this is what it looked like when they were working. They used the stone that they cut out to make all of the stone walls around the park. So this is 1933. This is Riverside Drive that eventually became the Henry Hudson Parkway. You see this old car coming out of the park. And this is a view today looking toward the Hudson of the road that goes north into the Henry Hudson Parkway, or you can come off the Henry Hudson Parkway to come into the park through here. Of course, right now it's closed and you can walk all over this road. It's closed during the pandemic, so people can get out and walk on these streets that have been closed to car traffic. I'm hoping they keep it closed. It's really nice to be able to walk or bicycle. This is one of the few parks where you cannot bicycle. And it's nice for pedestrians. When I lived at the boat basin, it got scarier and scarier to come out of the marina because these bikes were coming down from the George Washington Bridge all along the Hudson, and they'd zoom by at 20 miles an hour. In our beautiful little park, it is so safe because there are no bicycles. This is the view today. And now we've arrived at the Cloisters lawn, where there are also some amazing trees. This is our beautiful ginkgo. I took this, I don't know, maybe the second year I moved here, when the ginkgo had lost its leaves, its golden leaves. This is the ginkgo today, leafing out. It is a magnificent tree. It has room to spread its canopy. This is the ginkgo leaf. It's a fan-shaped leaf, and scientists believe that it is the first broadleaf that evolved from a conifer. They think these originally were needles that fused together. So this is the transitional tree between a conifer and a broadleaf deciduous tree. The Latin name is Ginkgo biloba, bilobe meaning 2 lobes. And it is dioecious. Last week I talked about the yew trees and the holly trees having a male plant and a female plant. Dioecious, 2 houses. So the ginkgo is dioecious. This is the male plant. These are the male flowers that produce pollen. And this is the female plant. This will produce the fruit that, when crushed, is so malodorous. But if you peel off the outside and wash the seed, it's easy to germinate. I have a few of them germinating now in my apartment, germinating little bonsai ginkgos. But it is a delicacy in Asia. And so you see people picking up fruit, and they will peel off the flesh of the fruit and they bake the seeds, and it forms a delicious delicacy. The ginkgos all turn gold at the same time, and they all fall at the same, the leaves all fall at the same time all over the city. The ginkgo, Charles Darwin called the ginkgo a living fossil. It lived during the era of the dinosaurs, just like the dawn redwood. Ginkgos can live thousands of years. This is a ginkgo tree in Hiroshima, next to an ancient temple. This ginkgo tree, a cutting was taken in the 11th century, and it was planted there. And then in 1945, in August, we dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. And the ginkgo tree was destroyed, they thought. But that spring, new shoots came up. And this is what it looks like today. It's over 1,000 years old. The ginkgo trees are so hardy. That's why they're planted all over the city. They're New York tough. They can stand pollution and drought and flood and apparently the atom bomb. Here's another beautiful tree on the lawn. This is a majestic American elm just east of the Cloister lawn. And this is last winter. And this wonderful sign. Jousters wanted for seasonal employment must work nights, because this is the site of the medieval festival. This is the jousting lawn. I love this picture. I love the faces in the crowd and the night. And a couple of years ago, this is where they had the sculptures of the knights. This is, I think it was the Swedish sculpture, I can't remember. But what she did was she sculpted men completely covered in armor, and then men with nothing, humans. And there's the cloisters. So this is an original picture of the cloisters when it was first built, with the steps going up. These steps have been rebuilt very recently. The cloisters were originally brought over by this man, George Gray Barnard. He was a sculptor and an artist. He studied in Paris. And while he was living there, he found all these ruins of abbeys that had been just abandoned. And he saw the historical value and the beauty of these artifacts, and he started collecting them. And eventually he brought his entire collection to New York, to a museum he founded on Fort Washington Avenue around 190th Street, the Barnard Museum. And eventually, when John D. Rockefeller Jr. built the park and he learned about this collection, he bought the entire collection from Barnard to create the cloisters. It was the ruins of 4 abbeys in France in the French Pyrenees. And so there are 4 cloisters put together, brought over stone by stone. And for me, the most beautiful part of the cloisters are the gardens, where they grow medicinal plants and poison plants, and plants associated with love and fertility, and plants used in medieval crafts. So you have all kinds of plants for dyes. Inside the cloisters are the unicorn tapestries. And at the time when they made them, they had this design called mille fleurs, 1,000 flowers depicted. And all of the colors came from 3 main dyes. The blues came from woad, the red came from madder, and the yellow came from weld. When we first moved here, we took a tour of the cloisters, and she talked about the making of the tapestries and the dyes that they used, and the flowers depicted, the plants depicted in the tapestries that are grown in the gardens. Our last stop is the Alpine Garden. So this is looking up. Here's the Alpine Garden up here, and you have to walk up. This is looking up from the lower level. So you take the stairs all the way up. The Alpine Garden was restored about 8 years ago by Keen Eng, a wonderful gardener who I believe is now working out in Brooklyn. But the Olmsted brothers designed the Heather Garden, and they designed the Alpine Garden, because our park is only 67 acres, but there's 8 miles of paths and 2 or 3 different levels. And so the Olmsted brothers knew they could build a beautiful rocky garden on the east-facing slope. And then all the gardens fell into disrepair, and it wasn't until Keene started working here that he decided to restore the Alpine Garden. And today it is just beautiful. When they built it, they put up a grotto with a little pond and a pump that pumped the water, and then the water fell down through a waterfall into a pond. This is what it looks like today. Jennifer Hoppe has said that they will eventually restore the pump and the waterfall and some kind of a water feature. To get up to the grotto, you have to go up these beautiful steps overgrown with all kinds of plants. So picturesque, romantic. Last week, someone asked about the Kusa dogwood, the dogwood whose fruit you can eat. So this is a Kusa dogwood. The difference between this and our American dogwood is that for this one, the leaves come out first and then it flowers. For the other one, the flowers come out first and then the leaves. Right now, the American dogwood is no longer flowering, but the Kusa is. And it produces fruit that looks like this. I tasted one that wasn't ripe, so it was a bit sour, but people tell me it can be very sweet and delicious, and the birds also love it. There's a Kusa dogwood flowering now in the Heather Garden at the northern end, just at the bottom of the Linden Terrace steps. This is about a year ago, and that's our granddaughter under the dogwood tree collecting the fallen petals. And here she is 4 years ago, discovering the Heather Garden. So these gardens and this park is loved by the young and by the young at heart. And I believe this is also one of Elise's photographs. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Leslie? If you'd like to unmute yourself, that's probably the easiest way to do that, and you can ask a question.
I hear birds. I hear birds singing.
This is the last in this series, so this is your big burning chance to ask those questions.
Leslie, thank you so much. If I ever get back to Manhattan, I can't wait to walk through there.
Oh, I hope you do. I hope that it becomes safe enough for you to come back. But, you know, it's not bad to be away from the city in the summer anyway.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, why can't I start my video? Oh, here we go.
Hi, Joanna.
Hey, how you doing?